We are so fortunate to have our own Tar Heel extraordinaire, Brooke Baldwin, here to speak to us today. Ladies and gentlemen, Brooke Baldwin, welcome home.
Melissa McCarthy's podium may move, but so does mine. Carolina, it is so good to be home. Let me manage expectations for this speech and any words of wisdom I might have, because nothing can really top our homegrown distinguished philosopher who proffered, "The ceiling is the roof." Thanks, Michael Jordan. Today I'd like to share my journey with you after I sat in this stadium, in this robe, 16 years ago. I will tell you about how I landed a job at CNN. I'll come clean about my mistakes, and I'll tell you what it's like to work in journalism in 2017. But before we get to me, Tar Heels, let's talk about you. You're the class where 17% of you are the first in your families to graduate college. How about that? Yes, that does deserve applause. You're the class where 60% of you is female. You're the class that in your sophomore year, you experienced the loss of our legendary coach, Dean Smith. And you're the class in your final year when our UNC basketball team showed the courage to fight for redemption and came home as national champions. I loved my time here at Carolina. This is where my commitment to journalism was ignited. People believed in me. That's the force that takes you beyond what you think you can do to what you can do. I call these people believers. First and foremost, my believers were my mom and dad, and they're here today, somewhere up there. Mom and Dad, I love you. And at UNC, my believers were my friends, faculty, and PhD student Dana Rosengard, who pulled me aside in Carroll Hall and demanded to know, why are you hiding behind the camera? You need to be in the anchor chair. And let me tell you, the excitement I felt when I got that call is the very same excitement I have felt at various moments in my career, and it started right here. Now, I realize that some of you know exactly what you want to do, and for the rest of you, it might not be so obvious. Sometimes it takes a little longer, and that's okay. But here's what I will say. Some very accomplished people that I've met have tried a number of things before finding their calling. Facebook, Google, Twitter didn't exist when I graduated. So if you're still trying to work out what it is you want to do, you're in good company. And note to parents, if I may, your biggest gift to these young people is your encouragement and belief in them. So it was the summer of 2001 when I left UNC and landed my first job in Charlottesville, Virginia. Now, there are 200 TV markets, number 1 being New York City, 200 being some tiny town in Alaska. Charlottesville was number 192. I covered everything from the grass roof controversy at Walmart to the grim reality of a double murder. But this is also where I made my first mistake. I froze on live TV. On the heels of that success, I was promoted to weekend morning anchor with my alarm clock buzzing at 2 a.m. So while my UNC friends were out having a good old time on their Saturday night, I was going to work. I was a one-woman newsroom, writing, editing, and producing my hour-long show, all the while rolling the teleprompter with my foot. And I loved it. The man who hired me in that first job, guess where he is now? Right here at UNC. Professor Cupp, wherever you are, thank you. Thank you. I then moved on to West Virginia. And let me say, the people there were lovely. But you know, in a book, when you get to that chapter, when the mood comes down and the storm clouds roll in and little things start to go wrong and the main character is just sad? Yeah, that was me. I wasn't sure I'd made the right decisions. I just wasn't hopeful about a lot of things. And it was Christmas Eve, and I was working. And you know what my mom sent me? My brother. We bought dinner at the 7-Eleven, and for a minute, I wasn't lonely. And it was one of the best Christmases I have ever had. Looking back, I needed those 3 years of experience. I learned how to make the best of it, and by the time my contract was up, I finally landed a job in Washington, D.C. That was baptism by fire. I learned very fast about speed and pressures and deadline. And the best part, I worked with the most talented photojournalists in town. And because I showed this willingness to learn, they taught me the art of storytelling, how to conduct a visually compelling interview, and how to be tough. That was a whole different level of experience and exactly what I'd been hoping for. So, when the next opportunity presented itself 2 years later, I was ready. CNN, my dream. Now, at first it was just my foot in the door. It was freelance work, no promises. So at age 29, I moved from my own apartment in DC back into my high school bedroom in my parents' house. I would have loved a job offer, but I knew I had to prove myself and walk that fine line between being persistent and pushy. There were many days when I wasn't hired and therefore wasn't paid, but I would show up at CNN anyway, pitching stories, emailing producers, trying to get on TV. And after 2.5 years, the nagging uncertainty, those jobs away from home, holidays spent in the newsroom, I was starting to wonder, was all of this worth it? In April 2010, I was in Gulfport, Mississippi, covering that massive oil spill when my phone rang. It was my boss, telling me that CNN wanted to offer me a full-time job as a correspondent. The real deal. The last time I felt that profound sense of belonging was when I was here at Carolina. Thank you. A lot of people ask me what a typical day looks like. And in live TV news, there is no such thing. My alarm goes off around 6:15 in the morning. Most mornings I go to Soul Cycle, fire up my body, which fires up my mind. I'm then reading email and various papers, Twitter. At 8:30 a.m., I jump on my call with my show team, listen to different opinions from my various producers. We discuss how to handle major stories of the day in terms of angles and guests. Sometimes we need a military voice or a member of Congress, an eyewitness. And then we start making phone calls, physically finding these people, and we get moving on this immediately. 9 a.m., I listen to the network call, which outlines the day's timeline, the top stories, and who's reporting on them. Jeff Zucker, our president of CNN, leads that call. And at about 10:15 in the morning, I'm in hair and makeup. I do not wake up looking like this. By about 11 a.m., I'm in my office just seeing which guests we've confirmed and which guests I should reach out to myself. I begin crafting questions for those live interview segments. I've got an eye on these 4 TVs in my office, on CNN and other networks. An hour later, I speak with my Jedi executive producer, Eric Hall. We lead editorial decisions, sharpen the focus of each segment, what I need to be asking, anticipating surprises, such as 2 guests with opposing views and how I should handle them should things go south. About 10 minutes before showtime, I change my clothes, walk to my set in the middle of the newsroom, one final makeup check, pop in my earpiece, say hi to the control room. The lights go on, and at 2 p.m. Eastern, I go live. Say at around 2:14, we hit our first commercial break. I've just interviewed 4 people about our lead story. I'm checking my notes. I've got an eye on email. I've got an eye on Twitter. And we're live and we're off again on a segment on the FBI. We have 3 people lined up, 2 sitting next to me on set, and 1 big newsmaker we've landed in Washington. 1 minute into that conversation, as I'm still listening to the person next to me, my executive producer, Eric, gets in my ear from the control room and in a calm but firm voice says, "Brooke, there's been a shooting." I take a breath. The teleprompter goes blank. An entire day's work gone. I thank my guests, but quickly cut them off and look right into the camera. The breaking news animation rolls, and I welcome my guests in the United States and around the world. Breaking news, police confirm to CNN an unknown number of people have been killed in a workplace in San Bernardino, California, and the shooter is still at large. Suddenly a map pops up on the screen showing the location of the shooting, and with very little information to go on at first, I calmly tell the world what is happening. Behind the scenes, my team is rushing to find people for me to interview, and for the next 2 hours, I'm pivoting between eyewitnesses, reporters, law enforcement. All the while, I'm constantly adding new information confirmed by CNN. There is chaos in the control room, but I have to be calm, sensitive, and above all, accurate. I have had many days just like that, and it never gets easier. I will never forget being in Newtown. Where 20 first graders were murdered. I interviewed hardened firefighters who could never unsee the unthinkable. I saw tiny white caskets, and I went home. I sat in the darkness, watched the sun set, and wept for the children who would never see the sun set again. In Charleston, I have been in that Bible study room and later interviewed the one woman whose life that racist murderer had spared. In Boston, I interviewed a veteran firefighter welling up as he described the haunting memory of covering that little boy's body at the finish line of the marathon. Last summer, I was sent to Orlando. 49 people had been murdered in a gay nightclub. And we had to tell the brutal story of the victims and the survivors, and we had the added dimension of this atrocity happening in an election year. Meaning we had to consider the effect of this terror attack on the election, how the campaigns would respond, and in turn, how the electorate would judge them. In the last 2 years, I have covered senseless carnage in Paris, Istanbul, Nice, the very worst of the human condition. Innocent lives stolen, families wrecked, impossible questions unanswered. But I will say this, the all too familiar cards, candles, tears, tributes, you see the very best of the human condition too. An overpowering resolve that life must continue, and an outright rejection of threats to our freedoms. 2016 also brought us the presidential election. My world changed. The second Donald Trump rode down the escalator in June of 2015, confounding the widely held view that he was a temporary candidate seeking publicity. In 17 months of chaos, I traveled to the debates, the primaries, but most importantly, I traveled to the voters themselves in their communities, listening to what matters to them. Now, I hadn't expected this. I met young women at a Bernie Sanders rally in Iowa, and they told me voting for the first female president wasn't a big deal, because they fully expected that to happen in their lifetimes. But an 80-year-old woman in New Hampshire saw it as her last chance. I sat on a Harley with some bikers who saw a billionaire TV star as the answer to make America great again. I talked to African Americans inside a barbershop in Atlanta who didn't believe a word from either candidate. The months dragged on and on. Now, I never claimed to know how the election would go, but on the ground, I definitely sensed a disconnect between the polls and the people. It didn't seem as clear-cut as the numbers suggested. In fact, my standard reply to anyone who would ask me, who do you think will win, was the following: I'm waiting for Wolf Blitzer to tell me. And at 2:47 a.m. on November 9th, he did exactly that. And we are 6 months out from that day. I still can't tell you if there is one overall reason Trump won. I know Democrats have plenty of reasons, but I'll tell you this: no one listened enough. No one listened enough. That reason alone is part of why I do this, journalism. Let me state the obvious. I have a front row seat to the world's biggest stories. I have a voice, and that's nothing less than an incredible privilege. It's our job to listen and hold people accountable. We have to scrutinize our leaders, call them out. In 2017, despite what you might have heard, journalism has never been more alive, more crucial. You've seen it this week. People need facts. We provide them across all platforms. Our stories drive markets, shape thinking, influence legislation, and put light on some of the world's darkest places. I believe very strongly that we owe our viewers and readers nothing less than honest, balanced, accurate news. And that is what we are committed to doing every day at CNN. And being a woman in journalism, well, the good news, there are lots of women in journalism. At CNN, we have a deep, talented bench. Elsewhere, we have seen courageous women At another network, stand up to their leader and call out injustice and sexism. A titan fell. And this spring, a female journalist spent tireless hours on a piece about that network, a piece that triggered the end of a powerful cable news host, a host who was called untouchable. Emily Steele of the New York Times had been openly threatened by this host in the past. He said to her, and I quote, "I'm coming after you with everything I have." But she didn't budge. She didn't back down. Her journalistic voice was heard, and that network is still feeling the aftershock. Oh, and by the way, she is one of us. Emily is a Tar Heel. This is the work we do every day. I am proud to be a woman in this era, in this time, at this moment, because what is truly untouchable is our thirst for the truth. I wouldn't be standing here if it weren't for my friends and my family, and let me just tell you one last story. It was the spring of 2015. President Obama name-checked me at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. I had just been parodied on Saturday Night Live. I'm filling in on prime time. Variety magazine wrote me up for beating Fox in the ratings race, and I had just summited all 19,345 feet of Mount Kilimanjaro. Life was good. But then it happened. I made a big, big mistake. I was covering the Baltimore Riots following the death of a young black man in police custody. The atmosphere was electric, volatile. Events were unfolding very quickly. I was interviewing a member of Congress live on the air when I quoted a thought I had been told several times the previous days, but I didn't attribute it as I absolutely should have. The long and the short of it is that it allowed the perception that I slighted some of our nation's heroes. I became the story. With lightning speed, my words engulfed the internet. Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Fox News, lacerating, graphic, violent threats were pointed at me. I felt vulnerable, alone, exposed, horrified that veterans, many of whom are my friends, my family members, and whose organizations I support, could in any way have appeared slighted. Would I keep my job? How could I recover from the online backdraft? That evening, I went to my hotel and closed the door. I couldn't eat, I couldn't think, I couldn't sleep, and at 10 p.m., there was a knock on my door. One of my oldest friends, Commander Bobby Rashad Jones, U.S. Navy and friend since the 7th grade, had jumped in his car, driven across state lines, into the night to come and find me. It was a low, dark, desolate moment, and Rashad was there. And that is when you learn who your real friends are. The next morning, I apologized live on air. CNN stood by me every step of the way. The point of this story, two things. One, recovery. Class of 2017, you are going to make mistakes. The key is acknowledging them and then recovering from them with grace and humility. Two, friendship. Our friends define us, improve us, are one of life's greatest pleasures, celebrate our successes, and are there when we need them or when they need us. And maybe somewhere along the way, you'll meet the person you want to share your life with. I have. It took me 36 years to find him. Every day with you, James, is a gift. I began by telling you about being here at Carolina and the value of surrounding yourself with people who believe in you, bring out the best in you, dare you to be the best version of yourself. As a child, I watched my dad get on planes every single week to do his consulting job. He set an example of drive, follow through, and curiosity to see the world. My mom taught me kindness, humility, gratitude, and how fitting that it's Mother's Day. Moms, round of applause. And speaking of families, I know your moms, dads, brothers, sisters, aunties, uncles, grandparents are here celebrating you. And of course, we are also here honoring them. We have something special in common. We're Tar Heels. And for the rest of our lives, we share this great honor and responsibility to look out for one another. And as time goes on, our Carolina connection grows. There are people in 10, 20 years looking up to you. And let me tell you, as someone who has sat there, now when my inbox is overflowing with work, there are only 2 words in the subject line that will stop me from whatever I'm doing, and they are Tar Heel. I stop, I read it, and I respond. And I just ask one favor of you all, please do the same. Tar Heels have been to space, won Oscars, run states. They've worked the night shift as a nurse to save lives, or have been the last hand to hold on when a life is passing away. They've spent longer hours after school so a child gets extra help, extra care. They've built businesses, preached the gospel, fought the war, carried the flag. Wherever you go, whatever you do, this Carolina degree carries with it a gravity, a legacy, a responsibility, and no one can ever take that away from you. People are full of great advice. Professors, parents, friends mean well. But in the end, the person driving this thing called life is you. Listen to you. Spend time being alone. Learn your worth. Dream. And never forget where you came from. Congratulations, class of 2017. Go get 'em.